The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement came into force on the 30th of May this year. 2 months later, it was operationalized. But now the questions are emerging. Is Kenya ready to trade with the rest of Africa? And are we up to the competition that is expected to come from some big powers like South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, or even Morocco? Joining us on Inside Government tonight, we are joined by the Principal Secretary in charge of Trade, Dr. Chris Kiptoo, to respond to these questions, among others. Thank you very much indeed, Buenos for joining us here.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I know you're a champion of free trade area, or the principles of free trade. First of all, are you convinced that all the ingredients are in place to ensure that the Continental Free Trade Area works?
Thank you very much for that question. And the answer is yes. We are ready for all the ingredients necessary. And this is why we were the first to not only sign the agreement, but also ratify. And the rest, 26 other countries have followed. And by now we have 27 countries that have ratified and signed, that have signed and ratified the agreement, while 52 out of 55 have signed. That is a commitment, political commitment, that has never been seen in the continent, despite the many failed efforts since independence, from the days of Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta and others who were championing for regional integration in Africa, including the Abuja Treaty that envisaged Africa being first divided into sub-regions and then becoming building blocks. And then later, earlier also the Lagos Plan of Action. All those were attempts under the OAU. But they were not as successful as the efforts made recently under the African Union. And so first, I want to thank the leadership of Africa, the presidents of Africa, those who have been championing, because they have made very good progress. In 2012, January, in their ordinary summit, the heads of state under AU decided that within 5 years, Africa must have a continental free trade area. Following that meeting of January 2012, within 2.5 years, there was a meeting in South Africa, June 2015, during which the African heads of state launched the negotiations for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And the negotiations took a short time, because 2.5 years later, we were done with the negotiations, and we met last year, March 2018. And remember, when the heads of state met in 2012 January, they said 5 years. So by end 2017, we were supposed to have an agreement in place. We actually met the timeline, because only 3 months that took place in June in 2018, January and February and March was just for consultation. But the heads of state, 44 of them, were in Kigali, and our own president, Uhuru Kenyatta, led the Kenya delegation. And they signed the agreement to say we are now ready. And then after that, within a very short time, we got the threshold of 22 out of 55. And that is why the agreement came 30 days after the threshold was met, which was 30th May.
Tell me this, and you have put it clearly that out of 52 countries, more than 45 have signed the agreement.
No. 52 out of 55 have signed the agreement.
52 out of 55 have signed the agreement. 27 out of 54 have ratified.
27 out of 55.
Out of 55.
Have ratified.
Have ratified.
Yes, after signing.
After signing. And one of the biggest players on the continent is South Africa, which is yet, well, they have signed, but they are yet to ratify this agreement. And then
South Africa has ratified the agreement. It's among the 27, yes.
Oh, it is among
Yes, among the 27.
Ah.
Even Nigeria which is now one of the biggest countries that did not sign, signed the agreement during the recent summit in Niamey, Niger, Niamey.
Then it gives the whole agreement, a lot of impetus. Yes. But the question still stands. What is it that the other members are seeing that the 27 who have ratified are not seeing?
No, I think they are seeing exactly what the 27 are seeing. But it is because many countries have different legal frameworks. And the decision-making differs from one country to another. In some countries like Nigeria, they delayed because their private sector wanted to be convinced that this is a good agreement. And so the president could not sign because they had to go through a consultation process. South Africa was the same. The South African law does not allow the president to sign any agreement before Parliament gives approval. So they had to go through cabinet and then through Parliament, and then he was given the okay to come and sign. This is the same thing for other countries. There are still different stages of consultation, and they are all lined up to sign.
So the delays are more political than technical?
Some could be technical, because there are some also could be capacity issues among their technical teams to make sure they convince. Because if the technical team does not convince their political leadership that this is a good thing for us, then that might delay, because the political leadership want to be assured that what they are entering into is the right thing, and the technical work must be done. So it's a combination of both, but of course there are some countries who are reluctant, and it is okay, it's allowed. That is why we set a threshold of 22, because it was understood that not all countries can agree to move in quickly. But the fact that we managed to get a 22 and we are now in 27, and 52 have signed, clearly, in my view, there is a very high chance that we will reach over 40 within a short time, so that most countries in Africa actually will be in the free trade area.
When are these countries that have ratified this agreement expected to start trading?
Good question. The agreement came into force on 30th June, no, 30th of May. Now, this agreement, when we signed the agreement, which has 3 protocols, and it has also annexes to those protocols. There's a protocol on trade in goods, protocol in trade in services, and the protocol on dispute settlement. Whenever you have disputes, you need to have the protocol in place. And each of those has annexes. Like the trade in goods has certain annexes. The first annex is on tariff liberalization. To what extent do countries liberalize? In other words, to what extent do they bring down their tariff regime? It was agreed that all countries should aim for an ambition of 90% liberalization. In other words, you bring down tariffs up to 90% within a period of 10 years for countries that are LDCs, what you call least developing countries. For countries considered developing countries, they have an ambitious time of liberalization, which is 5 years. So that is for tariff liberalization. For 10% remaining, it was also agreed that it would be broken into 2 parts. Sensitive list, which is up to 7%, and 3% of what is called exclusive list, which is list of goods you will never open. You say this is a sector we are not going, these are sectors we will not open for liberalization. The sensitive sectors will be for those sectors that you want to protect initially for a certain period. As you develop capacity, then you open up for competition. So those will continue. But the first annex of the protocol in goods is tariff liberalization. The second one is on customs cooperation, because all the customs authorities must cooperate so that customs procedures are harmonized, so that if you are moving from one territory to another, then you have a harmonized customs system. The other one is also on transit movement. That if you are bringing goods that don't go, like they don't come to Kenya, they are going to Uganda or they are going to Zaire. We had to agree also on the movement of goods which are on transit. The other one is on trade facilitation. We need to agree that we must facilitate movement of goods. Here, this is on release and clearance of goods. So if a good comes to Mombasa, we need to see how to facilitate those goods to move quickly by way of making sure the procedures are for clearance are harmonized, and then and you make it faster. So we have all agreed to harmonize our trade facilitation agreement so that at the border post, for instance, we have one-stop shop instead of each country trying to create their own border post. And there are many things, including modernizing customs procedures, establishing single window system, for instance, so that goods documentation is electronic rather than manual. So this is just one of them, trade facilitation. Then we have another annex which deals with SPS, that is sanitary and phytosanitary. How do you handle plant and animal products that move, like flowers, like vegetables, fruits? We have to agree on a system like that. Then the issue of standards, which is called technical barriers to trade. Then there is a trade remedy. We must also have a regime for each country to defend itself against dumping of goods. So if there are goods around, you have a tariff, a framework called trade remedy that you can use.
You know, from your enumeration there, it is clearly evident that we are not likely to see African countries trading within this agreement, not in the next 5 years or so.
No. I think I was going to tell you that immediately after countries ratified, we have been going through now ensuring that each of those annexes are ready. So there is an annex, for instance, called rules of origin. For rules of origin, it determines what good can be said to come from Kenya, or what good is coming from another country. We have agreed up to 90% of the rules of origin, and we are during the summit that was there in Niamey, Niger. It was agreed that we conclude by December this year that all rules of origin are done. Tariff schedules. Every country is supposed to submit to what extent they have liberalizing. All this will be done by December. So we have all agreed, and the heads of state directed, that trade under the CFTA will begin on 1st of July 2020. 1st of July 2020. So for LDCs, they will have 2020 to 2030 to move from up to 90%. For countries like Kenya, they have from 2020 to 2025 to move to 90% of liberalization of their tariff.
And tell me this, for Kenya, whose ambition is to jumpstart, the manufacturing sector's contribution to our GDP from about 15 to 20%, what would this do to our nascent manufacturing sector when it is opened to countries like South Africa, who have whose manufacturing base is 5 times bigger than ours?
Let me first tell you that for the last several years, more than a decade, Kenya has been trading with Africa as much as it has been trading with the rest of the world. What do I mean? The share of our exports to Africa compared to the total exports has ranged from 40 to 45%. Until recently, when it has come slightly, to about 35%. Yeah. And so Africa has been our key market. That's the first point to make. The second point to make is, of the commodities that we are selling to Africa, what is the structure? What type of commodities are we selling? Virtually all the commodities that we sell to Africa have been manufactured goods. Those we sell to other countries are semi or maybe even primary products, which have, you have not done a lot of value addition. But virtually all those we sell to Africa are manufactured goods. So if we have to increase manufacturing to 15% of GDP from the current level of about 7.7%, then clearly our market is in Africa. We need to reach out the 1.2 billion people. What we have been selling to Africa has been mainly to EAC and to COMESA. We have not been able to access SADC region because we access only by paying duties. But now, if we are in a liberalized regime, that means we'll access the SADC region without paying duty. It has been difficult to access the Central Africa region without paying duty. The whole of ECOWAS, 15 countries, we have to pay duty if we have to access a market. Now we are going to enter that market without paying duty.
And they'll also be entering our market without
they will. So given that we already have that comparative advantage, yeah, we've been doing well. Compared to other African countries, Kenya has been doing very well when you look at the level of trade. The inter-regional trade for all of Africa, the average is 12%. But for us, we are talking of 35% and above, meaning we are doing better compared to other African countries.
Tell me this, have we identified products that falls under the 7% and the 3% rule?
Yes, to a large extent, those products will likely be those already taken care of within EAC, because we are already in a customs union, and there are some areas that we have put sensitive products. Like if you have to import any product to East Africa community, like sugar, like maize, very important food items, you pay up to 100% duty. It's not 25% that has been put as the highest tariff. So we have attempted to protect that sector. Now, this is different when we are in a liberal regime in Africa. What we are saying, among African countries, we will say no to some sectors. So those are sectors we are still discussing. I can't say at this stage that we have identified this or that. We have some idea, but we are still discussing. And we will agree, because we have a timeline that we have been given to decide on the sensitive list and the other one. But clearly, those we have agreed means that they are not part of those we are going to protect. And it's also a matter of give and take. Because, like, for instance, when we were discussing this agreement, we had to agree first the customs unions of South Africa, the SACU, and EAC, because they are both customs unions. And South Africans really wanted to access this market on beef because of Botswana. Yeah. Botswana, is great in beef, and they wanted to access our market. And beef is also another area here we want to protect. A lot of our people here, Uganda, Kenya, we are all trading and we want access. And then there is motor industry. South Africans are good in that area and they wanted to access, but we are also developing our motor industry. But it is a matter of give and take. It is just not going to be us selling to South Africa or South Africa selling to Kenya. There are other markets we are going to sell, and we will compete.
And this draws me, actually, it draws me to the next question, and you have actually put it aptly. For example, when you look at the South African auto industry, they do not assemble vehicles, they manufacture vehicles. Vehicles like Mercedes-Benz, Nissans, and all these. We are just a small industry of assembling. If we allow South Africans to sell to us their completely manufactured vehicles and they are allowed into the Kenyan market, aren't we suppressing the nascent auto industry in Kenya?
I don't think that should be a problem, because even when you go to a pool or a sea, you will find a big fish and a small fish surviving together in an ecosystem. So the same thing for stronger nations like South Africa and Kenya, if you compare with a country like Djibouti, which has also agreed to be in this. So it's always, you have to specialize in what you are good at, agree to face some competition. That is the reality of trade. If you borrow or look at Europe, when Europe started, it started with what is called Benelux, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and then Italy and Germany. Germany and Italy are strong economies. If you look at Belgium and Luxembourg, they are very small economies. But those two economies, which are small, have done very well, even with the expanded Europe. So it doesn't mean being small is necessarily going to be a disadvantage. You have to look at your economic model and your strategies and see how to work towards survival. So even for Kenya, with our nascent industry, of a motor industry, South Africa is not just a market that is likely to compete with us. We also have a lot of imports that are coming, used vehicles, that are really in my view, the competitors, the other ones that are competing or flooding the market. And we still have to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody can afford to buy a new car. Yeah, so we still have segments of our society that still have to defend, to rely on affordable vehicles. That's why we have to balance maybe 5 to 8 years. But if we also make a decision to reduce slowly by slowly, so that eventually Africans can be buying from their market, which are new products. That's an aspiration we hope to achieve.
Tell me this, Dr. I mean, some of these agreements, they are hinged on specific countries, developing their own internal mechanisms, on how to deal with some of the shocks, like the shocks of competition and so much. We have been having issues with the COMESA sugar safeguards. We have been seeking extensions, and yet we do not actually see the end to these extensions. Aren't we likely to be caught in another time warp, like the way we are in the sugar industry?
I think these are important policy questions you raise, and we have also been telling our stakeholders that there is a limit to how long you can seek safeguards. Because if we don't manage to develop our sugar industry in the midst of competition, and the fact that we are already members of different trade agreements, then you have to face a competition, and there may be a limit to how much we can protect. But we have always sought these extensions as we push the sugar stakeholders to work towards ensuring that the sugar sector is competitive.
Which has not happened.
Yeah, if it doesn't happen, sometimes you have to look at whether you are looking at the producer or the consumer. Because the government has to balance the interests of both the producer and the consumer. The consumer wants affordable sugar. You want to, in the morning, you take breakfast, you have you manage to buy sugar. That sugar must be cheap. And sometimes the consumer cares less on where the sugar comes from. It cares more on availability of the sugar. Yes, but now the producer wants a good price. And we also have an obligation as a government to support our sectors. But we have to balance, and I think that's why at some time we allow trade to take place. Trade means allowing for arbitrage. Where there is a shortage, it goes so that there is a balance. The consumer is able to meet the supply from the producer, and vice versa. The producer is able to meet the demand, and that really happens. It is happening not just in Africa, but the rest of the world.
Are we also likely to face, similar challenges, in different sectors, like, for example, manufacturing, whereby countries are expected to boost their manufacturing industry so that it can face a competition that will come from superior manufacturers?
You cannot start fearing for competition because already we have that competition. Look at East Africa. We have zero tariff for raw materials and machinery. Any of these countries bring, they bring when they don't pay duty. And so if the Kenyan sectors, which are also producing those raw materials, do not become competitive, definitely they will face some competition. So I don't think myself that there's going to be a problem if we open up our markets, as long as we prepare our competitiveness. And I think under the Big Four agenda, there is a lot that our colleagues in government are doing to ensure that we build a competitive manufacturing sector. And we have discussed, we have agreed, for instance, textile and apparel is a key market, a key area that we are going to focus on. We are doing very well already, especially in the US. We have leather. This is an area we hope if we did well, we can actually support our farmers who are in livestock and the rest. Then agro-processing. A lot of agriculture, if you look at Kenya, our agricultural output, only 16% is value added. We want to take it to around 50% of value added. So there is opportunity. And I think sometimes when you face competition is when you also wake up to the reality that if you don't do something, you are going to be wiped out by competition. Yeah. So I think we are alive. Even as we sign up to these agreements, we know also that you have to prepare. And we tell our manufacturing sector that your market is not just Kenya, which is 45 million. Your market is 1.2 billion people in Africa. And your market is 7 billion people in the rest of the world.
Because we have to wrap up in the interest of time, so Mithis, how ready and prepared are we to live in a highly liberalized African market where competition will be stiff as a country?
First, we are ready in the sense that, one, we have been very aggressively looking for more markets. I've said that. We have EAC, we have COMESA, we have now what is called tripartite free trade area that brings also together COMESA, EAC, and SADC. Then we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We've secured our market in EU under EPA, in US under AGOA, and bilateral agreements with a lot of countries. In the domestic economy, we are trying to ensure there are fair trade practices. We are fighting counterfeits, illicit trade, because that is the danger to our manufacturing sector and to the rest of our economy, especially danger to Big Four, whether it is health sector, housing, or food security. So you've seen heightened efforts to fight illicit trade, and we are going to be working very hard to ensure that only genuine products trade in our market, so that we are on a level playing field, that if we are having a product, it's not in our market, it has not paid duty, it is substandard, and it's a counterfeit. A counterfeit infringes on intellectual property. It hurts the brands that we have grown.
Good. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. for joining us here on Inside Government.
Thank you, Brian.
We'll keep on discussing these issues.
It's been my pleasure.
Very good. Dr. Chris Kiptoo, Principal Secretary in charge of trade, joining us here to help us understand more about the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement that came into force about 3 months ago. You've been watching us from KBC Channel 1. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you for your time. We do this again next Thursday, same time. Until then, bye.